And WNST football coming up, and the Ravens playing fake football, and the Orioles out on the West Coast. But there is a great story brewing here. Bobby Sablehouse has had me on it for the last couple of years in this 30 for 30 on the Baltimore boys. And finally, it's here this week, and we've had Bob Wade on. We talked to Bobby Sablehouse, but this guy here is the director of the film, the 30 for 30, Baltimore Boys. It debuts on Tuesday, but it's going to run, and I'm sure you'll be able to Google it and watch it. And for those of us who are old enough and grew up around here, know the legend of Dunbar basketball and Muggsy Bogues and Bob Wade and everybody else, Wingate and Russ and all the guys that were a part of the thing here. Marquise Daisy joins us now live via satellite. And first off, you can follow him. Marquise_Daisy is a film director and producer, was the director of this film. And, you know, these 30 for 30 documentaries, Marquise, I'd say this, and I know you've watched them too, doesn't even matter what the topic is, right? If a film gets made into a 30 for 30, chances are it's going to be an hour well spent, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's the hope. You know, I think the approach from our standpoint at ESPN Films is that, you know, we try and create content that, you know, sort of transcends sport. You know, a lot of times, you know, I always say, you know, if you want to watch, you know, say LeBron James, you know, dunk the basketball, you're going to go to YouTube and you will be exhausted by that. But I think that what's going to pique your interest and retain your interest is when, you know, a subject or a director goes, you know, much further than the actual sport. And that's what we like to do with 30 for 30. We like to contextualize everything and put it into a social context and make it much bigger than just a sport for people who really don't care at all about sports, but they can really just, you know, tune in and really be, you know, captivated by the content. So I think that's the approach, really.
Well, when I asked you before you came on the air how old you were, you said you're 35. And, you know, I think for any story, there's stories that we've lived through in our lives, and then there's the things that happened before our memory or were outside of the realm of something we experienced in real time, right? And I think, you know, you do try to capture all of these things as though no one's ever heard of Muggsy Bogues or ever heard of Dunbar High School. Here in Baltimore, if you're my age, you're familiar with most of this stuff, and I think, you know, most people old enough know who Muggsy is, but they don't know this incredible story of this one little high school with, you know, in the inner city and the struggle and, you know, in the aftermath of all the problems we still have here in Baltimore. For you, what did you know about this story when it wound up on your desk with Bobby Sablehouse? Because Bobby knew all of this, because Bobby grew up into it as well, you know?
Well, to be honest with you, I didn't really know anything about the story. You know, it was just kind of like fresh to me. But as I started to, you know, research this topic, to be quite honest with you, you know, I just sort of saw my own story within the story of the Dunbar program from the early 1980s. You know, I think that a lot of times, you know, when it comes to making a good film, you know, it's really just a microcosm of life. And I think that, you know, in looking at their stories, you know, I saw a lot of myself in, you know, what their story ultimately became. You know, you talk about early 1980s Baltimore. You talk about a time where the city was really challenged from a socioeconomic standpoint, a financial standpoint, and also from a race standpoint. You know, I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, you know, obviously, you know, born in the early 1980s. But, you know, by the time, you know, I was, you know, just a few years older, you know, we had moved to Harlem, you know, the east side of Harlem, which was hit very hard by the crack epidemic. And that's something that I saw growing up. That's something that, you know, was a part of me. That's something that I saw in my household. It was something that I saw in the school system. It's something that I saw in the streets. So when I found out that that was a part of, you know, the core of what Muggsy and Reggie Lewis and Reggie Williams and David Wingate's story was, you know, it was a no-brainer to me that, you know, this story needed to be told through the lens of Baltimore. Yes, Dunbar is a huge, you know, character in this story. And yes, Dunbar is, you know, Dunbar basketball is the reason that we know about the story. But quite honestly, you know, to me, the biggest character in the story is the city of Baltimore, and where that city came from and everything that it had to endure. You know, we start the film with the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King, which ultimately led to the 68 riots in Baltimore. Really, and, you know, it decimated the city. Industry left. And what was the new industry that came in? Drug dealing. and it targeted young kids like Muggsy and those guys from Lafayette Court Projects.
Well, they were all born during that period, 68, 69, 70. You know, that
Absolutely.
was, they're my age. I was born in 1968 here in Baltimore, and I was born literally 6 blocks from Dunbar High School in the fall of 1960. I was born at Church Home Hospital at Broadway, literally 6 blocks from Dunbar, you know?
Yeah, so to me, that's the story. That's why people are going to care about this film. It's not because Muggsy, you know, could dominate a basketball game without shooting a shot, or Reggie Williams became one of the top players in the country, or that David Wingate and Reggie Williams went to Georgetown. Quite frankly, you know, we have a bunch of athletes who get Division I scholarships each year. But what separates their stories? It's perseverance and endurance and tragedy and, you know, that type of thing. And I think that this was what this film is.
He is the director of the film, Baltimore Boys. You've probably heard a lot about it if you've been in the sports space this week. We've had Bob Wade on. We've had Bobby Sablehouse on. At some point, I'm going to track Muggsy down and find him. He's hard to find because he's short, right? That's my Muggsy joke there, so I'll give him a hard time when I get him on here. But, you know, I guess for all of these guys, and especially, you know, Muggsy's story's a little bit more well-known, and you know, he had a bit of a celebrity about him because of his size and how long he lasted in the league, and he still comes back here and does amazing things. Him and his sister, I'm sure you know as well. But the other guys have become a little bit more anonymous. I don't know that if David Wingate walks down, you know, Broadway, people know who he is anymore. Same thing even to some degree with Reggie Williams, you know, and obviously the Reggie Lewis story took a you know, very tragic turn that I'm sure, and I can't wait to watch the film. I have not seen it yet, full disclosure, so I will be setting the old VCR, as they say. But I'll be watching on Tuesday when it debuts because the Orioles are out on the West Coast. So I'll be into it, but I really do want to see what the story is and how you treat it because I'm not familiar with all aspects of this. I'm familiar with the basketball side of it, really.
Right, and I think that, and that's a great thing. And I think that, you know, out, you know, in the DMV area, and, you know, in that area, especially in Baltimore, and especially for people who are around, you know, your age and, you know, a little bit older than me, they're going to know the basketball story. But I think that, you know, especially in the world that we live in now where we're talking about, you know, where the country is in terms of race relations and in terms of just from a political standpoint, I think this film is going to work really well, especially for the youth. There's a lot of symbolism in this film. And, you know, one thing that I wanted to say is you're right. You know, you talk about Reggie Williams, you talk about David Wingate as people who might not be, you know, people who would be noticed if they're walking down the streets. But the same goes to, you know, the rest of the guys who were on those 2 years from 81 to 82, 82, 83. This story, although we focus on, you know, the 4 guys who went to the NBA, but the story is much bigger than that. You know, they had 11 guys who went to Division I schools. Like, think about that. I don't even know if that's ever happened again. And then you have 3 guys from those 2 years who were drafted in the same year of the 1987 NBA draft in the first round. Like, you know, when does that happen? You know, it just doesn't happen anymore. Actually, I'm sorry. David Wingate was the first pick of the second round. But 3 guys from the same high school program who were drafted in the same draft. That's special. I mean, when you think about the Kentuckys of the world, those are specialized college programs. But you're talking about a public school from inner city Baltimore. You know, it's a remarkable feat.
You can follow Marquise Daisy out on Twitter. He is the director of the film Baltimore Boys. It's on ESPN. It'll debut on Tuesday, but it'll run again and again. And you can certainly give a Google or give a follow to him at Marquise_Daisy. That's Daisy. You do a lot of stuff for ESPN, or you know, I know in the film and the director background, a lot of stories don't make it, right? I mean, you know, these pitches come. Hey, I've got a great story for you. ESPN can't do them all, and it can't do them all justice. You know, there was something special about this that clearly caught the eye of the people in Bristol who do this, right?
Absolutely. I mean, you know, I think what piqued my interest was, you know, you can make the argument that in every city you're going to have a ton of people who are going to make the argument, well, we had the best football team ever, or we had the best basketball team ever, right? That's natural. I mean, I would make the argument that my high school were the best high school basketball team ever. But you know what separates the Dunbar program? They sent 4 guys to the NBA. And I think that's what jumped off the pages to us. at ESPN.
Has that ever been done before? Is there any other prep? And I know, look, there have been some prep schools where, Stu brought some kids down for a little while and, had 3 or 4 NBAers on a recruited team somewhere in the foothills of Virginia or whatever. But in a legitimate way, that is an incredibly hard thing to do. I mean, I give you an example. Jack Del Rio went to high school with Don Wakamatsu, and they both have been, NFL head coaches in Major League Baseball. I think there's a great story about Iron Mountain, Michigan, and the ties of Tom Izzo and Steve Mariucci growing up together. There are some neat stories of that. But 4 guys in the NBA, I don't know if I've ever had 4 guys in the NFL at the same time, right? I mean, high school program.
Well, that, and then also we're talking about public school. We're talking about urban. We're talking about urban, underprivileged public school. Like, that's unheard of. I mean, typically, there's the old saying that when you come from a disadvantaged background, you're either, you're going to make it out from sports, from, the grave site, or you're just a little bit smarter and you go to college. But it's never really, your program is going to produce 4 NBA players. I mean, it's incredible. But you know what? All credit to people like Bob Wade and William Sugar Kane, who preceded Bob Wade. They established such a culture in Baltimore in a time where it wasn't very easy. And those 2 teams were the result of that. And you can't say enough about Bob Wade and what he was able to establish. And to this day, I spoke to Muggsy today, and I was asking him a couple questions over the phone. And one of the first things that he brought up was, but it all started with Bob Wade. And I think that's just a testament to what those guys were able to accomplish and to build, really. I was glad to talk to Bob about it this week, too. I can sense the pride in his voice and the beaming part of it because, you get recognized at the time, and then, they say time will not dim the glory of the deeds, and 30 years later, somebody like you and somebody like Sablehouse has to come along in ESPN to tell that story because, maybe it wouldn't have gotten told if you don't tell it. So we're looking forward to it. Man, I know how much you've been struggling because I see your picture on Twitter in that Knicks hat. So, I know times are hard for you, bro. Yes. It's a hard time in Knicks land, but you know what? We'll be back. Next year might be the year. No, I'm just joking.
You got another Baltimore guy there running around in Carmelo, so,
There you go.
We tried to ship him off to you. Hey, we're going to watch the film and celebrate it, and I really do appreciate you taking a little time and coming on and shedding some light on some of the background of it. We'll be watching. We'll be following you out on Twitter. Here's Marquise Daisy. That's MARQUIS _Daisy, DAISY, the director, not the producer, of I get directors and producers mixed up, right? I mean, I just watch the movies. I don't know how they're made,
Yeah, no, I'm with you.
It is Baltimore Boys, and it does debut on ESPN this week. Thanks, Marquise. Appreciate you coming on, man.
Thanks for having me.
Good luck with it. I know it's gotten some rave reviews on the front end as well. The ESPN 30 for 30 series comes to Baltimore this week, which is pretty cool. Telling a pretty good story, a legendary story about Dunbar High School. You can find me out in the Buy a Toyota Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn Radio app. We do come in crystal clear from anywhere in the world. You can get our morning newspaper shipped to your email inbox at 7 a.m. each and every morning. That's all powered up by Planet Fitness and planetfitness.com. Don't forget, Dennis Colatzos will be here on Thursday, driving you home from 3 until 5. And he is the SSV on WNST. And, of course, Coons Ford sponsoring that, as well as our WNST tech service for any breaking news. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. If you're going over to Wembley and London for the Ravens game, we're throwing a Saturday all-day party. I'd love to see your face in the place. Throw me an email. We'll get you some more information out about that. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook, as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports